First, thanks Tina for your invitation. This is a truly special honor for me because we are a young lab. We started in 2014. Currently, we've trained 6 undergraduate students, and now in our lab we have 4 currently working with graduate students, and myself as well. Tina invited me, and the purpose of me talking to you is kind of to me it's more like a kind of an opportunity to know you and also introduce myself to you. Regarding to the expectation, my expectation really depends on your own plan. First, I want to know you in terms of your current research experience. How many of you are junior or senior? And the rest, I guess, is sophomore, freshman. Okay. So out of 6 undergraduate students in my lab, 5 of them, I have them in their junior year. I only have 1 who is currently in sophomore. My general suggestion, Tina also mentioned this, is academic goes first. It will be your top priority because research itself is a time commitment, and I suppose most of the faculty, they will expect you to achieve additional workload besides your coursework. So right before you decide to join the lab, I want you to be ready in short. I want you to get a fundamental setup. So that's why I don't really recommend you start to join the lab in your first year. You're still adjusting this whole environment, this new environment, and doing research. It's really I would say a different experience from coursework, because well, that's a fun part of doing research because nothing is predicted. At least in my current lab, we are building a lab, and all the undergraduate and graduate students in my current lab, we are building a culture ourselves. I am experimenting ways to work with people, and I have a group of very talented and motivated people to work with. So that my expectation is, after you join the lab, I want to build a culture of almost like a family. This family will have its own culture. The culture depends on how people work with each other. And normally, I would suggest you spend at least 1 year in a research lab. Simply because even with 10 hours a week, it will take at least 1 semester to get you trained. For you to be able to perform experiments relatively independently. That's a long time. So if you just decide to spend 1 semester in a lab, very likely you won't really have the chance of trying things that you want. On the other hand, that's also the time commitment from a graduate student or postdocs who train you. So I would suggest at least stay for a year. At least currently in my lab, all undergraduate students, they plan to spend at least 2 years. So in my group meeting in day 1 for every semester, before every semester starts, I will have an outline. This outline applies to any undergraduate student. And it's a timeline on how long do I expect you to learn individual protocols, and how long should I expect you to do research, independent project by yourself. And that I strongly suggest every undergraduate in my lab to do the senior thesis, because that's something you can achieve and you can we have a complete story. Sure.
I will talk a little bit more about senior thesis at the very end, just for those of you who are interested.
Okay. But in general, there's no universal way to work with all undergraduate students. So that's why I said my expectation really depending on your own plan. The bottom line is I want to use my lab to provide you a platform or an opportunity to help you know yourself. I got answers from several of you why you want to do research. I think this experience is really what I expected. I really liked, if you can put your thinking in this way, I want to experience it and find out if I like it. Because to be honest, I cannot really push you to do anything. Even I want these things to be done, but I don't want to force you to do anything. And the best result usually comes from your own motivation. I've seen, although we don't really have too many undergraduate students to sample, but even from our current pool of undergraduate, I already see how a motivated undergraduate can make progress beyond my imagination. That's the result I want to see from everybody. I want you to feel what doing research is like, and then decide if this is your thing. And then okay, like after 1 year or even 1 semester of experiment or doing research, you come up to me and say, okay, I don't really want to do research. That's totally okay. But imagine this is an opportunity for you to do something different and invest in yourself, that you actually take something with you. That's why, in general, my lab, I have expectation that everybody, including graduate student and undergraduate student, they will actually give a formal lab meeting during this semester. And during the presentation, all the audience will critique, will provide sometimes very critical comments to your presentation. Besides the scientific content in that presentation, I also encourage my students to give a good presentation, format-wise or style-wise. So you can see this learning experience is totally different from sitting in the classroom and then passing the exam, because this whole learning experience is different. And I would say it's the fun part of doing the problem solving. But I want to have maybe 2 or 3 minutes to answer your question. If you are curious about anything related to research or contacting faculty. Yeah, I encourage everybody to actively contact faculty.
Email the preferred way that you
I prefer email, but I do have people knocking my door and for a 1 minute quick chat. That's okay too. But I'm really sorry that I cannot really take anybody who contacts me, because most of the time the lab has a capacity. The reason is because I don't want you to get lost after you join the lab. So normally I'll assign at least 1 graduate student working with you. And then in the early time, I work with undergraduate myself. Actually, currently, I still sometimes work with undergraduate myself. Dill is actually 1 student in my lab. He's going to talk about from student work. But I work with Dill myself. So that's why sometimes I apologize that I cannot really take anybody. But don't get frustrated, and then still have contact anybody else. you can always email me and don't be shy, because it doesn't really hurt things. Yes, Lee.
Can I join your lab? Sounds great.
Yeah, welcome. Yes, please.
Why do you typically have undergrads start out doing a new lab?
Yeah, this is something I said I'm experimenting. So normally when I just started my lab, there's certain protocol that I need to figure out. In our case, we do molecular cloning, we do mammalian cell culture, we have fluorescence imaging, and we also build, sometimes we need to build some electric circuit for a LED array. So those kind of protocol, some protocol, they require no research experience. Others require you to have training in biosafety. And always I emphasize the safety issue. So whenever you start the protocol, I'll make sure you understand the SOP, the procedure. And then always starting from very simple protocols. For example, you can do a bacterial transformation, grow colonies, inoculation. Those kind of protocol, very likely you already learned in your lab work. So after you pass this fundamental level, well, maybe they can help with mammalian cell culture. If you are good at cell culture, well, let's take the cell culture to the microscope and learn imaging. But then again, this all depending on your own interest. I might give you some unexpected project, like the one that Dill is working on right now. Is totally different from what we traditionally would do. For example, Dill is right now using a 3D printing technique to help us generate a device that we can use in imaging. I mean, this kind of protocol, nobody is teaching Dill, but we've figured out a way to do this together. So it's really, there's no universal protocol, but then I always encourage you guys to start easy. And currently, for all my publications, the independent work from this campus, our undergraduate's name is always in their author list because they made substantial contribution to it. Okay?
I'm going to go ahead and introduce Dr. Steve Blanke. He's a professor in microbiology, and he's going to give you a little bit of background about his lab and his perspective, and then we'll finish with our student perspectives.
All right, well, that was great. I'll try not to repeat most of what you said. So I'm glad all of you are here today. You should be really excited about undergraduate research. I will tell you that historically we've been very supportive of undergraduate research. In my lab we've had over 160 undergraduates. And one of the reasons I feel so supportive is because back in my junior year in college, to say that I was drifting would put it mildly. I was a biochemistry major. I really didn't know what I wanted to do. At that time, doing undergraduate research wasn't really part of the scientific culture as much as it is now. And I was lucky enough to have a professor sort of step on my foot a little bit and challenge me to do undergraduate research and apply for a fellowship. And I begrudgingly did this, and remarkably was chosen for, it was an NSF grant, undergraduate research experience grant, which required that I ruin all my summer plans and go and work at another university. And it was absolutely the best experience I've ever had. It entirely changed my life, the way I looked at science, and really what I wanted to do. And so for me, that's why I'm standing here today, is because of undergraduate research. And so I feel supportive in that same way. Now, you've heard the expression family a number of times, and really a lab is like a family. And this is my family about a year ago. Great looking group of people. Except for that guy in the back there, maybe. And that's what I think one of the real fantastic things about working in a lab is that it is a family culture. I mentioned that how wonderful it is to do undergraduate research from the undergraduate perspective. But in my laboratory too, and I think probably yours as well, there's incredible value in having graduate students, postdocs, have the experience of learning how to mentor. And some of them are just fantastic, but they have to have that experience. There's really not a job that you can get with a graduate degree which doesn't require mentoring or supervising in some way. So for me, I see it as really two fantastic things. One is an opportunity for people in my laboratory, graduate students, to have that opportunity to mentor. And for undergraduates to really get a feel for what it's like to be in an environment like this. I guess if you feel the same way, I feel incredibly lucky to have this job. There's no other way to describe it. You know, you can't ever judge what you're doing based on one day. Because if you did that, none of us would be working, right? Or none of us would be in school. There are tough days. But if I take a step back and look at what we do for a living, it's really incredible. We make stuff, we look at stuff, we discover stuff. It's fantastic. So Tina asked me to talk about expectations, and many of my expectations of people in the lab are the same as Kai's, so I won't recapitulate all of them. But I will talk a little bit about who comes to the laboratory and who doesn't. And Tina alluded to the fact that you need to be persistent, and I would agree. There really is a lot of demand these days to have an undergraduate experience. Again, I would encourage you to do this. I find actually that the laboratory experience itself, the techniques, aren't the most useful or beneficial aspect to doing undergraduate research. I think you're exposed to a way of thinking, of problem solving. You saw that up on the board that you won't get any other way. So in my laboratory, this may surprise you how we decide who comes to the laboratory. I get probably about 300 requests a year by email. And so we do a pre-screening. And what this means is members of my lab choose about 50 people, and they have them come in and they talk to them. And I think undergraduates come in and enjoy this part. People in my lab are really nice. So they come in, they talk to a couple of groups of graduate students, they tell them what we're doing, what the advantages are, how things work. Okay, and from there, we choose about 10. But I'll tell you right now, we have 11 undergraduates in the laboratory right now. And we'd like to keep it around 10. And then comes the hard vetting. It's really difficult. We have always fantastic candidates. It's really difficult to choose based on short meetings. And so what I do then is these students come and talk to me, and I spend a lot of time doing something that they don't expect, and that's talking them out of doing it. We talk about knowing expectations. It's really important to understand expectations. And so I spend my entire time with them telling them why they shouldn't join our lab. And then those who do come back, we talk to some more and really make sure they want to do this. And I can tell you from the experience of people in the lab that those who do decide to join find it really a fantastic experience. I'll tell you a little bit how we do some of this vetting. But one thing I would say is I always require those people who want to come to the lab to go back to their families. I've often found that there are the expectations are not really clear, and they're also not clear to the families and the undergraduates. Often, candidates will come in and say, well, I've talked to my mom and dad, they said this is great. I said, do they really know what this means? Do they really know what this means, what you're getting into? Because summertime is the time that things get done, for instance, and you really are giving over summer. Okay, what I ask undergraduates in my laboratory to do, for instance, is to begin the day after final exams, which is the first, or whatever the first day of summer one is. But the requirement is that they have to take 3 weeks of vacation at the end of the summer. What we like to do is get everyone in the lab at the same time. Things are very productive this way, they're very fun this way. Okay? And often, students will come and say, you know, I talked to my parents, they had no idea. I can't do it. I said, that's okay. This is the time we want people to say no. I truly mean that. At the beginning is, I don't think any faculty member would mind at all if someone looks at what's on the plate, what they have to do, and they decide they can't do it. I had one student a couple years ago, they said, yeah, my family said this is great. The First week of summer, they found out that the family had bought her a ticket to go to Europe that summer. You know, where did that come from? Right? So it's really important to understand expectations. And then finally, it's time to join the fold. And this is, like I said, a lot of fun. So in talking to people prospective candidates about joining the lab, we really work with 3 guiding principles. First is commitment. And it's really important that they understand the level of commitment that goes into doing undergraduate research. We usually ask people to do at least 2 years of research. This is really more for them than anything else. It really takes, you mentioned a semester, sometimes it takes a year really to sort of get your mind and to grasp what you're doing and to get your mind around it. And so we're very upfront about what this commitment is going to be. This commitment is usually, Tina told you about the 5 hours per credit hour. We usually ask people if they can, although we're very flexible about this, to take at least 3 credit hours per semester. I'll tell you why in a moment. So not only does one need to be committed, but they need to be consistent. This is a real important aspect of undergraduate research. Often it's tempting to do binge research. And I hear this a lot. Well, I got 2 tests this week, so I'll come back and work 60 hours next week. And it doesn't work at all. Consistency is one of the most important characteristics of doing anything creative. Those of you who play instruments, violin, anyone? Okay. It's not like riding a bike, is it? If you don't practice for 3 weeks, you lose your skills. It's the same thing with research. If you are not consistent, you will never get anywhere. And it's the perpetual spinning of wheels at this point. And then probably the most important is engagement. This is unlike anything you've ever done. I promise you that. You may have done things that you enjoyed and are very important, but engagement in research is really the most important thing. There's no such thing as putting in hours, showing up and doing what you're supposed to. That's really not what it's about. You mentioned you're interested in understanding how people think. This is exactly what it's about. And this is the engagement part. This is the fun part. When engaged, it takes your mind. You need, and again, there's no such thing as just showing up. Okay, so one of the things that we do in our laboratory is when it looks like a person's ready to join, the next thing we do is we have them draw up a contract. And we ask them to explicitly write down everything they understand about what they perceive to be the expectations. So we don't write any of this down. We ask them to give us their perception of expectations. And then they come back and bring it, and we talk about it. And often it's not unusual that the expectations, as they perceive it, as a candidate perceives it, is different than what they really are. And this is the time where we try to really, we use this as a tool to try to really clarify things. Okay, so everyone in the laboratory works with a graduate student or a postdoc. And it's, depending on the graduate student or postdoc, they may have 0, 1, 2, or 3 undergraduates they work with. I have 2 graduate students who are exceptional mentors, just fantastic, and I've learned from them. Okay, so the relationship with their mentor is really critical. And so what you find is that within the laboratory family, you have these little mini families that I think sort of arise and are kind of neat. And what you have are people working together in groups to accomplish things. The PI is myself, Kai, and the graduate relationship is also important. It's important in a different way. It's really the pillar of undergraduate research is the undergraduate, the mentor, and the PI. My role is very different than the mentor. I'm there to help you in any way that I can. I unfortunately can't get in the lab as much as I used to. In fact, it's been about 15 years since I've been in the lab, probably. But yet, there are a variety of things that I can assist you with. I have, over the years, developed about 50 50 or so modules, learning modules and advancement modules that cover a variety of things from scientific topics to career advancement, how to become an effective speaker, you mentioned that. I'll tell you that there's no better way to promote yourself and to have opportunities than to be an effective speaker. Likewise, writing. Writing is critical for your career no matter what you decide to do. All of you are smart, every one of you. And no matter what you do, writing is going to be critical for this. So we spend a lot of time on writing as well. But there are a lot of other things as well that we cover. We typically do this during the summer. The weekly commitment. We think of things usually in modules of weeks. The weekly commitment is very important. Consistency. Again, this idea that unless you do things and you continue to renew your skills, that it's like spinning the wheels. Every week, if you miss a week and you come back, it's like hitting the reset button a week after. And then, of course, as I mentioned, the importance of the weekly engagement. That is being engaged with your family in the laboratory, being engaged with your mentor, and being engaged with me. And there's a variety of different mechanisms by which we do this. I'd be happy to talk about what those mechanisms are another time. So this is the lab this summer. And the question for you is, can you tell the difference between undergraduates and graduate students there? It's very difficult, right? And I think this again underscores sort of what a research family is like, right? It's filled with people with very different backgrounds, very different interests. We have bioengineers in my laboratory. We have people from the vet school. We have a variety of different people. We all work together for different and yet at the same time similar goals. Okay? So this won't make any sense, but here are the undergraduates. Probably can't see any of the faces very well. But what a fantastic group of people to work with. And as Kai alluded to, I think any faculty member who's had the opportunity to work with undergraduates will tell you it's one of the most rewarding aspects of our what we do. So again, I would say, you know, if you're thinking about doing undergraduate research, to pursue it. It's really a fantastic opportunity. You'll take away things. If you decide not to go to research, you'll still take away things that are valuable for you for the rest of your lives. I think I will stop there. So thanks.